Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'll be doing my top 13 of 2013. I read 141 books this year, and there are so many good ones to choose from, but I managed to narrow it down to just the top 13, so I'm going to go ahead and start. These aren't really in any particular order, but I'm just going to go ahead and start here. The first one I chose was The Demdike Legacy by Barry Durham. This is a book I received from the author for review, and I was delighted with it. This is a paranormal mystery, which is, I thought, a really great combination. I love mystery, I love police procedurals, something that takes place in England, all my favorites. Add a paranormal twist to it. So what we have is a story of a girl, actually a woman, who's found murdered. Her husband discovers the body, and there's a noose tied around her neck. The noose isn't used to strangle her with, it's more symbolic, and her husband recognizes the symbol right away. It takes place in Lancashire, which has a history of witchcraft dating back 400 years earlier, the famous Lancashire witch trials. And the descendants of these original witches that were hung still live on, and in fact, our main character, the husband, is one of those descendants. And as the police are brought into it, they soon realize that there's a lot more going on to it. It becomes sort of a serial killer at work, as he's methodically finding these descendants and picking them off one by one. And they eventually have to kind of come together to help solve the crime. And I thought it was just very well written, really kind of intriguing. I love the characters and everything, and I look forward to more from this author. I've already read Familiar Territory by him, which is sort of a prequel to this one, but I really enjoyed this one the most. The next one I have, but I don't have a picture of, and it is Pushing the Limits by Katie McGarry. Probably a surprise for most of you people, since it is a contemporary novel, which I don't generally read, but this is one example that should tell me I need to read more of these. This is a YA contemporary fiction about two kids, Noah and Echo. They have both had sort of traumatic upbringings. Noah lost both of his parents, and he and his two brothers have left sort of homeless in the foster care system, which has sort of let him down and kind of separated him from his brothers. And then we have Echo, who has a traumatic experience, something involving her mother, and Echo has all these kind of slash marks on her arm. You come to find out how this occurred, what happened to her, with her and her mother. She herself has had this memory blocked in her head. She can't access it. She doesn't quite know or remember what happened, and it's sort of like the mind sort of trying to protect itself. And it's interesting to see these two kids and their background, their very sad backgrounds, and how they're sort of brought together and almost in a way kind of help heal each other. But it was very moving, very, very well written, and I definitely recommend it. Onto the physical books I have actually copies of here. No surprise, Jasper Fforde, one of my favorite authors. This is The Big Over Easy, the first book in his Nursery Crime Division series. Absolutely love this. I had originally started reading it many years ago, and for some reason I couldn't get into it. Put it down, and this year picked it up and read right through it, and absolutely loved it. He brings in all these nursery characters. Our main detective is Jack Spratt, and he has an assistant named Mary, and they're looking into the suspicious death of one Humpty Dumpty, who's found shattered at the base of a wall, and they're looking into the fact of whether he has been pushed, whether he committed suicide, or whether it was just an accident. And it was just really fun book to read, and like I said, his characters and world building is just amazing. So moving on from nursery world into the fairy tale world. The Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell by Chris Colfer, beginning of I think it's maybe a trilogy. Absolutely love this. First of all, it is a gorgeous book. So is the sequel to it. Difficult to pick between the two, but since this one kind of launched me into this series, I absolutely loved it. About these two kids, they're actually twins. They receive a fairy tale book from their grandmother, one that they were read to when they were very young, and something happens where they manage to fall into the book and land into the world of fairy tales. And it was really great seeing all our fairy tale characters sort of grown up, living these whole unique worlds, and it becomes sort of like a treasure hunt. They have to find all these items, put it together to create some kind of spell that will enable them to return home. And it's just a great adventure, really well written, great characters, and wonderful world building. Getting on a little spookier note here. I love sci-fi, I love horror. This combined everything. 172 Hours on the Moon by Johan Harstad. It was just really, really creepy. It's about this kind of a contest. People can enter, be teenagers, and they can win a chance to make a trip to the moon on the anniversary date. and 3 teens are chosen. And there's a lot more going on that the government has in mind, because something happened on the initial visit to the moon that they've never told the public. And since then they've built this sort of space station on there, and they want to return to it, and there's, I guess, some kind of element on the moon too that they need to harvest and for money purposes and things like that. But they decide to bring these teens on board and make it so they can help fund it and get a whole new generation involved. But these teens find themselves in some really interesting and very horrific situations. It was really creepy. Definitely recommend this one. And on the same kind of sci-fi theme, I have Saving Mars by Sydney Swanson. This is the first of a series. I've read the first 3 books. I have the next 2 ready to go. I can't wait to start them this year. And it's about a girl named Jess. She is rather young, but a very, very good pilot. A bit headstrong, doesn't always follow the rules. She has a brother who, I believe he was kind of autistic. He has a tendency to sort of shut down and almost become catatonic, and she's the only one who can kind of pull him back out of that. And the situation we have, they're living on Mars, sort of a colony that was once part of Earth, and sort of an experiment in relocating. But Earth decided to close out that whole experiment, and they wanted the people to return. But generations have since grown up on Mars, and they did not want to leave their home. So they've sort of divided between the two. It's not a good relationship. It's sort of like they won't send supplies to them, and the only way that they can kind of survive is sort of sneak back to Earth to get supplies. But there are also these satellites that surround the planet, and they have to find a way to sort of take control of those. That's where Jess's brother comes in. He is, although has these other issues, he's a bit of a computer genius, and there is this sort of mission to return to Earth and sort of take control of these things. So he is needed for this mission, and although she is not necessarily needed as a pilot, she's needed to control her brother, so she'll be another asset in terms of flying. But it was really interesting. The world on Earth is very unique. It is a dystopic society. I don't want to go into all the details of it, spoiler issues, I don't want to ruin it for you, but I love that whole combination. It takes dystopian, sci-fi, and action, puts them all together in this amazing book, and I definitely recommend this series. Moving on from that, I have The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. This is another YA sort of dystopian book. It's set in a world where a disease has sort of stricken a lot of the America's children, and if they managed to survive, a lot of them came up with these strange abilities, lots of powers that actually made people very afraid, and they created these so-called rehabilitation camps. Now, our main character, Ruby, at 10 years old, is sent to one of these camps by her parents, who are actually afraid of her because of some things she can do. And once you're at these camps, you're kind of color-coded, from blue to green, orange, red. I think the higher up the oranges and reds and things like that are much more powerful and more dangerous. When she gets there, she manages to convince the others that she's not quite as powerful as she is. But it turns out she's like an orange, and she is quite strong. She eventually escapes, joins up with some other people, and are trying to make their way in the world. There are others that are also looking for her that want to use her powers to bring down the government. But she, of course, doesn't want to be used as a weapon. She just wants to live her life. So it was just really good action, really great world building, and characters. Big zombie fan that I am. This one was a wonderful surprise. It's a book I won on Goodreads. I'm not sure if it's a debut book for this author, but it's 100 Days in Deadland by Rachel Ochs. Absolutely love this. It is sort of based on Dante's Inferno, and the book is divided into the 9 parts, or the 9 circles of hell. And we have our main character, who is Cash, an office worker who, at the very start of the book, finds herself in this zombie virus that is spreading rampantly through her office building. Outside the building, she manages to escape, runs into a truck driver who helps her get away from the situation. His name is Clutch. These are actually nicknames that they are kind of given each other as the story progresses. But Cash is basically the poet, and Clutch is Virgil, her guide through this crazy world. He is a former soldier who suffers from PTSD, so he has some issues. He agrees to help her for a short period of time, but then expects her to move on because at this point it's all about survival, and he doesn't see her as an asset to survival, but that's where Cash has to kind of toughen up and really, as the course of the story goes along, she becomes quite a badass, you might say. She has to in order to survive this world. So the two end up joining up. A teenage boy joins them later on, sort of this makeshift family that's trying to survive in this world. And I just thought it was great the way the author kind of even ties it in with each, all the sins and things that are mentioned in the original poem are shown in so-called humanity that they encounter along the way, and all the evil things that they do to survive. So it was just very well written. This is going to be the beginning of a series, so Purgatory and Paradise will show up in the other books. This is the Inferno version, and I definitely recommend this one if you're into zombies or just a really good action story. I really enjoyed this one. Moving on is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I love this. Magic, sort of a challenge between two magicians that pit their sort of so-called proteges against each other. They don't really know who they're kind of fighting against or what the rules are. Everything is sort of really ambiguous for these main characters, but I love the whole idea of the circus that sort of magically appears overnight and can disappear just like that. The characters within the circus were intriguing. The whole world building of it. The writing style at first really reminded me of J.K. Rowling's writing. I absolutely adored this book, and I definitely recommend this one. It was just really delightful. I'd heard so many things about it, and I was hoping it wasn't just all this hype monster going on, but once I read it, I was really just drawn into it and the characters and everything, and I definitely recommend that. And speaking of J.K. Rowling, I have to recommend The Cuckoos Calling under her other name is Robert Galbraith. I'm hoping this will be a series. I've seen on Goodreads it's listed as Cormoran Strike #1. Cormoran Strike being the main detective who's brought in on this case by about a death of a famous model. Her brother asks him to look into her death. She apparently jumped from a building. He doubts that it was suicide and wants him to look into it. I love the character of Cormoran Strike. Just really well developed, like all of her characters. I was just really drawn into it, and I really enjoyed it. I can't remember the character's name now, but I read too many books. There is a assistant. Why can't I remember her name? But a temporary assistant who comes to work for him, and she is extremely delighted the fact that she's going to be working for a detective. She finds it very fascinating, and she really turns out to be quite an asset for him along the way of the story. And I like the relationship between the two characters, and I think they'll make a really good team, and I hope to see more in this series. Again, one of my favorite authors, one of my two favorite authors, Jasper Fforde and Kim Harrison. This is book 11 in the Hollow series. I originally won an ARC copy of this book and read it immediately. Fell in love with it. Probably one of the best ones in the series, I thought. This is about a woman by the name of, oh my gosh, Rachel Morgan. She is a white witch. As the story begins, back in Dead Witch Walking, by the time you reach this one, she's a whole nother thing, and I won't go into all those details. I want you to uncover that as you read the books. But, oh, it's just amazing. They run this sort of agency where they kind of bring in paranormals, it could be vampires, witches, werewolves, whatever, that are sort of breaking the laws. This is sort of a society that is aware of paranormals amongst them, and I believe those relationships are going to kind of break down in the coming book, which I think it's called The Undead Pool. I actually have an ARC copy upstairs, which just came in a few days ago. When I opened that box, I let out a scream. I was so happy. I'm like, I can't wait. Oh, and so love this series. I think there's going to be like maybe 13 books total, so it'll be coming to an end in the next couple of years, sad to say, but this is an amazing series. It's an adult urban fantasy. It's got everything in it. Great characters, great writing. Can't recommend this enough. Last two, I'm going to pick a manga series. This is Death Note. These are the black editions. There's 6 black editions or 12 individual books. And this is by Tsugumi Oba and Takeshi Obata. Wonderful series. It's black and white manga, Japanese, reads right to left. Takes a little getting used to, but once you start, you don't even realize it. And it's just a great series. It's about a book called The Death Note, which is something that belongs to the Shinigami, which are like the death gods, and he drops it onto Earth, where a young boy by the name of Light Yagami finds it. And if you write in the book, if you write a person's name in it as you're thinking of their face, that person will die within the next, I think it's 30 seconds. And, actually, I'm not sure if it's 30 seconds. I forgot the time frame. But they'll die of like a heart attack, unless you specify how they will die. And there's so many different rules, and as you're reading along in the book, some of these rules to the Death Note will turn up in these little sections here, and it'll explain the different things. And as Light is kind of experimenting with this book, he uncovers a lot of these new things that he can do with it. And he's actually the son of a police officer, and is sort of disenchanted, or that's the right word, but with the whole system, and criminals kind of getting away with things that they shouldn't. And when he reads, that if he writes a name in this book, at first he doesn't believe it until he tries it out, and is shocked at this new ability he has, that he could basically be a god and cleanse the world of all these criminals. And eventually there's a group that's trying to find out who is committing all these murders, because they kind of see this pattern that is taking place, and all these criminals just dying of unknown causes, all seem to be dying of heart attacks. And one of the people involved in the case happens to be his father, and another mysterious character by just the initial L. And L and Light are kind of pitted against each other through a majority of the series, and it is just really intriguing, this sort of cat-mouse game between the two geniuses trying to outwit each other, and one to remain hidden and one to find who the criminal is. So really, really great. If you're looking for to get involved in a manga series, I definitely recommend this one. My last book, sort of the conclusion of a series that was just amazing, and this is Light by Michael Grant, the last in the Gone series. This one was just so well written, the best of the series. Very moving. There are some characters that we'll lose at the end, but it just wrapped up everything so perfectly. It was a great series. I can't recommend it enough. Not so thrilled with the American covers, but I think the UK covers are pretty cool, particularly if you get the last one that's all black with the lightning bolt. I've seen that one. That is just amazing. But I really love this series, love the characters. It's about a world where this dome just sort of appears over the town, and anyone, I think it's under the age of, was it 18? Disappears. So what you're left with is a bunch of young kids taking care of, toddlers. They're on their own. There's, no supplies coming in, electricity. They're trapped. They cannot get out of this town. So if a fire breaks out, they've got to take care of it on their own. If someone's sick, they've got to take care of it on their own. There's no doctors, no professionals, nothing. And then a lot of other weird things are happening. A lot of the kids have these powers that they develop, and as you can imagine, there goes Skippy. Someone must be coming home. Anyway, I'm going to conclude this before she starts barking her head off. But lots of weird things happen in this series, and it was just amazing. You really become attached to a lot of the characters, and just like any of those, when they don't make it to the end is rather sad. And this one really very moving. So those are my top 13 of 2013. Let me know if any of these were on your list, or if you had something else maybe you can recommend. Looking forward to some really great books in the coming year. So thanks for watching. Bye-bye.